Good afternoon, Gary.
Hello.
So, did I understand? You said yesterday that you were thinking about taking on the whole budgeting process, or I actually was under the impression you had already done that. You'd already decided that. So
No, so the way this is supposed to work is the ESD did our budget last year. Um, we are transitioning, so we have a new business manager. We were going to transition that to that position this year, send her to your fall conference for training. Um, Turns out she's pregnant and going to have a child during the budget preparation timeline.
oh, happy day.
Yeah. So Tracy's going to start on the budget with Rhonda, and then it's going to move to Rhonda. Um, but what we want to try to figure out, because I've done a budget in Infinite Visions before in their provisional or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
I've done it by a spreadsheet before, which is typically how I give it to the business manager, is just off of my spreadsheet. Um, But for us, we're only a 680 student district. So
Yeah.
the cost of implementation is pretty big for us.
Right. Okay. Well, um, I definitely know what you're saying about the complexity of the provisional databases in IV. I haven't heard anybody who's actually attempted it. I might have heard of one or two people who've actually said, "Oh yeah, it's great, greatest thing since sliced bread."
Well, I'm not going to tell you that.
And if you talk to Betty Jones, who's now retired, and Carrie Hughes, who's the new, she used to be a customer support person. Now she's actually the salesperson. It's pretty cool. And Infinite Vision started out as a budgeting system, but other than a handful of people that I've talked to, very few people use the provisional databases for budgeting. Very few.
Yeah, we did it once, and I'm not going to tell you it was the slickest thing since sliced bread. It was better than typing it in Infinite Visions, which we've done a lot. um, so, what we're trying to figure out is if this is going to solve some of our problems going forward. So, um, I can price out a salary proposal in a couple of minutes off of a spreadsheet I've built over time, but no one else will ever be able to do that after I leave. So,
That's the problem with Excel, is that the author understands it in its basic. I mean, all the formulas and everything. You understand what's coming from where, but nobody else. It. I mean, you could explain it, but it takes actually getting in and using it. And really, as the complexity moves up in a spreadsheet, the less and less likely anybody but the author can use it.
yeah, I think my spreadsheet's like 57 pages long, with you know multiple tabs, and trying to figure out where something went wrong. You just couldn't do if you don't build it yourself.
Right, right.
So
Kim Kusick over at Lincoln County has got a fancy spreadsheet that she's used for years, but now that she's taken over the lead position, maintaining that is a burden. She's still using it. They're actually looking to implement this year, hopefully, maybe this year or next. But we hope to take a lot of that complexity off of her. So anyway,
So I'm hoping that we'll be able to use this to price out our salary proposals, and we'll do it side by side with my spreadsheet this year, just so we know we have reliability, and then we'll be able to move that
right.
to that.
very, very common tactic first year, but I mean, Rhonda's been building your budget for several years. So the transition is all set up and ready to rock and roll. So we just have to add your names to the access. Well, I think Rhonda added you and Tracy, and now there's Wanda.
Well, there shouldn't be a Wanda.
No, what was the other name you said?
Tracy.
Oh, just Tracy. Okay.
Yeah, just me and Tracy.
Okay, so we get you added. Yeah, and I meant to mention that to Rhonda. She was in the morning session. So, okay. Tammy Booth, I made great progress on the Infinite Visions changes, fixes for the link to Northwest Regional last night. I'm hoping to have it done tonight and your daily actuals start to flow again and access to your Infinite Vision data. So Tim's going to try and show creating a new year tomorrow. So it's so I've got to make sure that gets done. So and again, that goes all the way back to the Solar Winds breach that was a national issue in the last few months, that Northwest Regional just kind of locked everything down, and that kind of pulled the carpet right out from underneath us. And Stuart Long is now the CIO over at Cascade Tech, and he's pretty good at security. So I kind of, if I wanted to hire somebody to do network security for me, there's only a few people that I would just give them the keys to the house. And Stuart's one of them. So I got to trust he knows what he's doing. So anyway, good afternoon, Jim and Olivia and Bill. And Jennifer is on, and Matthew. Matthew, where were you from? What school district?
Oregon City.
I'm sorry?
Oregon City.
Oh, Oregon City with, yes. Okay.
Susan,
yes. Okay. So what time is it? It's 1:06. We're late. We should get started. Okay. So yesterday, we left off. Oh, I'm not sharing yet. Oh, which screen am I sharing?
Yeah, we see it.
Oh, it is that. For some reason I didn't have the blue border around it. Okay. Oh, right. Clean up my desktop. Okay, so yesterday we left off, I think, update employee the fixed cost tooltips. These guys right here, and that they're now available on the baseline. So if you save a baseline, it's going to save the fixed cost tooltip with it. Okay, applying employee adjustments will trigger employee calc if the source column is using a pay component. What that means is there were certain, if you're using a column like employee status or retirement status or workers' comp code or any of the lookup lists, if you're using them as a source column in a calculation or pay component, it wasn't always triggering the red flag indicating that the scenario needs to be recalculated. And we fixed a lot of those issues throughout this year. Next item, changes to user fields. Many people don't even know that there are actually user fields. There's 2 Boolean or check boxes and 2 text type boxes or list boxes on the financial, and there's also the same on the employees. So if we come over here, balance, that's going to be a checkbox, and these labels can be whatever you want, and you can actually key in a list of values. I should trim my scope up so these grids load faster. Okay, I'm going to do that real quick. So here we had to 2 users, a Boolean, a checkbox, and a list. We can call them anything we want. And so we're going to first change the labels. Keeps popping up on the screen. So we're going to call this eye color. And we're going to call this update column label eye color check. And then I'm going to also update this so we get red, green, orange, blue. And so now I have the ability to set my own custom list and have this user-defined checkbox that can be used for any purposes you want. Again, there's 2 Boolean and 2 text lists, or just text boxes, and there are 2 on the financials and 2 on the employees, 2 sets of each. And these can be used in pay component and calculation qualifications. So if you wanted to create just a really simple one-off qualification for a pay component or calculation, you could just create a checkbox to use that value.
Yeah, you could just go over to the calculation, say anybody with green eyes gets, $50.
Gets glasses.
What,
gets optical
whatever
care.
you want to do with it.
And so the item from the change log was that these didn't use to trigger the employee grid being dirty and requiring calculations if they were used in a calculation. So that's that. When recalculating employees to use, and this is actually wrong. It's the user was not prompted to calculate segmented or annualized employees. So if I want to just recalculate this employee, I can go recalculate just that employee, and it now asks you, do you want to segment or annualize? For those who aren't familiar, a segmented position is one that has like 35 days in the fall, and maybe 70 days in the winter and another 30 days in the fall. If the position start and end dates all correspond end to end, it will automatically set them up as segmented employees if those dates are aligned properly. And that will then calculate the FTE. It won't consider them individual employees or individual positions. It will actually consider their work hours, and it will pick the max work hours of the 3 positions, or however many segments there are for their total FTE. It won't sum up, like if they have 8 hours in the fall, 8 hours in the winter, and 8 hours in the spring, it's not going to sum that up to 24 hours of 3 FTE. It's going to pick the max FTE of all 3 of those segments, and that will become the salary total FTE. And annualized employees, that's depending on the setting for the salary schedule, it will adjust the work days to follow the work calendar, the position record, or the salary plan days. This is handy to just do this for all employees when you start your new year, because throughout the year you have people moving positions, and you get a lot of them coming in with partial years. So it'll automatically annualize your positions for you. But you weren't prompted to have this done when you recalculated just a single employee. And so now you get that prompt. Okay, employee context menu, show all. I'm having deja vu. Tim, there is something I look at that it is sending a double click forward and opening that, and I'm not sure why. If we're looking here, did we do the context grid, the show all yesterday? Does anybody? I don't remember. If we're looking, okay. little glyph here on the tree, the blue square, red square, that indicates that that employee has more than one funding. So if we look at, like here, Kimberly Choi, she's got 2 fundings. They're sitting side by side. So she just got a different, what is that? A different area, but the rest of the code is the same. But Roy Capps here, we don't know where his other position is. We could either find him but since we're just looking at a single center, he could be someplace else. But if we right click on him and we show all, it's going to open up a context scope and show us all the records for Roy Capps. And there's his records there. And you can see he's got 2.64 hours in sub-area 900. Another thing a lot of people may not know, if you hover over the right edge of the tree column, is it not doing it in the context grid? It may not. I'll show it on the main grid. It should break out the account code for you to show you what those different codes are and where they are. So to get back out of the individual employee or show all or context grid, whatever you want to call it, you just click the reset button and it will go back to the layout and the row you were in before you did that. Eventually, I'd like to pop up a grid at the bottom, like a session or a spread grid, and have this context menu show up as a subgrid down below, kind of a split grid, and show just those records. So let's see if that's there. If you hover right over that left edge, it works on the financial grid and on the employees grid. It'll show a tooltip of the account code. It'll break it out for you down here, the fund function. So if you're looking and you don't remember what 31 is, it's Rainier High School, area 120 is science. So probably could add that breakout to the account column too. That would be cool. All right. Now you know how features creep into ESP. Okay, the context menu show all, and then it puts the grid right back in the state it was in when you come back. Okay, salary plan grid. Any questions on employees? Where's my screen with people on it? There we go, way over there. Okay. All right, so the salary plan grid used to be a really, really simple grid. But over the years, it has evolved with more and more districts doing things in different ways. We made a change, quite a few changes to salary schedules. One of them was to support Skyward, which there's nobody here in Washington or that's using Skyward. But Skyward has a pretty extravagant salary negotiations planning system where you can build SN plans. It's probably similar to what you can do with a provisional database in Visions, but a provisional database is actually a complete separate database where an SN plan is kind of like a subset of your staffing plans, and then you can migrate them from being just a planning set of employees into actually your payroll or your employee management system data. But in order to allow them to pick which SN plan they want to load from, we actually show them a pop-up grid of what's available and what SN plans exist in the Skyward system. But when you reload employees, you won't actually see that. You'll get a much simpler view, but they would actually have a taller window, and then down here they would have this SN plan map. And the reason I'm telling you about that, because Infinite Visions has got a feature in it that's there's two problems that I have integrating with Infinite Visions, and they're both salary schedule or salary plan related. The first problem is when you build a salary schedule, it's generally set up if it's hourly, then it doesn't really matter that you put how many work days are in it. But if it's an annual plan, you really should set the work days so you say, okay, this is like a certified plan. This plan is based on 181 work days. And it lets us figure out what the intention of the salary schedule is. And if we don't have that in Visions, we have to just assume 260 days, and then you have to remember to go in and adjust it. And the reason for that, on an hourly plan, it's not so bad, but on an annual plan or annual schedule like the teachers, we get the annual rate, but we need to calculate an hourly rate for that salary schedule. That's what allows us to do extended work days or extra work days or furloughs. We have to be able to calculate a daily rate within the system to figure out and we need to know what the hourly rate is. So if it comes in as an hourly plan, we calculate the annual rate, and if it comes in as an annual plan, we calculate the hourly rate. And Tim's going to talk a lot more about that tomorrow. But the other problem that I have is Infinite Visions lets you create salary schedules that either are intended to step horizontally in a matrix or step vertically in a matrix. And even there is a setting that determines which way they will step, whether it's horizontally or vertically, but you only have access to it and you can only set it if you go in and configure stepping for the Infinite Vision salary schedule. Now, it's kind of silly that whoever did the database didn't realize that a salary schedule can only step one way. You're not going to ever step a schedule across the matrix one year, across the steps, and then the next year schedule it or step it vertically across the grades. It just doesn't make sense. So they should have put that setting at the salary level, at the schedule level, so we could actually set it and I would know how that schedule is supposed to be used. In reality, I don't know. And when we first integrate a system, we have to go in and we have to actually examine the salary schedule and see how it looks based on the numbers and the labeling. And then we create a background table to tell us whether salary schedules are pivoted or not. And that's the term we use to know which way they go, as if they're pivoted. And it's all fine and good once you're up and running. But the problem comes in when you create a new schedule and then you transition a group of employees to a new schedule that did not exist, then we don't know how it's supposed to pivot, and you have no way of telling us in a data sense. So when that happens, quite often we figure it out after the fact when somebody calls us and said, my salaries are all over the place. I just don't understand what's going on. Then we started to ask some questions and figure out that it was a new schedule this year and it pivoted in a different way. And it's not uncommon at all for the same district to have some of their salary schedules pivot horizontally and some of them pivot vertically. So what I'm going to do this year, so it'll be implemented next year, is I'm going to create a staffing plan mechanism like we have for Skyward. And what it's going to do is it's going to list all of the salary schedules and how they are currently being pivoted, or if they're new, we won't know. So you're going to be able to go in and define how the schedules are set up. And if you get it wrong, it's not going to be a problem. You're going to go reload them, change the pivot, and it's going to clean everything up and make sure that everything works well. So that's going to be a change that's coming for next year, is to set up the Infinite Vision staffing plan. So So those two items you don't have to, first two items in the salary plan grid, you don't have to worry about. The next one is if you're looking at this salary schedule, and let's say I've got a step enable for all my administrators. But let's say for some reason we decided that these two positions or these three steps, they don't actually get a step this year. And then you look at the salary plan in this mode or collapse, you wouldn't know that in in grade 1. That's interesting. That's a big sign that this is pivoted wrong when the grade says step. This salary schedule might be pivoted wrong. I'm gonna have to check. So what we do is we put, what's that?
The annual rates go down, so I think it is.
Yeah. But what we do is if any of the properties or values on the salary plan grid, if any of the child rows in this hierarchy are set differently than their parent, then we put this little green plus in there. That's going to indicate that there's something unique or different within the rows of that parent. And so if I recheck all those, then you can see that indication goes away. It's we had a problem also if you added steps to a salary plan that we weren't copying all of the properties, the step enables, the COLAs, the work days, the work hours. We weren't copying them from the maiden plan record or the grade into that new step. And so we would see those green pluses showing up on the salary schedule when you open them. But we've cleaned all of that up, and the logic for showing those pluses is working well now. So that's what the green pluses mean on the salary plan grid. We did have a district this year, and we actually had a couple districts that had new salary schedules created, and they didn't know to go in and actually assign a benefit plan. And luckily they were pretty small, but there was no indication that no benefit plan was assigned. So we added a validation to the salary plans that gets fired during recalc that will check salary schedules or plans to see if there's a benefit plan assigned. And if there is FTE, or there's actually employees assigned to that salary schedule, and there is no benefit plan, it's going to indicate a user action. If it's a null or empty benefit plan, if it's null or empty, it's going to indicate a user action required. And if it's set to no benefits, it's going to create notes. So I'm going to set this to no benefits, and I'm going to save that. And because there is FTE assigned there, and I'm going to show the log. Now, a note does not, at this point, does not summarize at the bottom of the process log the way it does for user actions and errors. But we decided in the morning session that that would be very valuable for you to see now that we have a salary plan with no benefits with FTE, and it tells us which plans, grades, and steps are affected. So this is a big clue that something may be wrong. It's flagged as a note because it might be correct that you have people on a salary schedule with no plan. But had that been empty or nothing assigned to it, these notes would have been user action items, and you would have been prompted at the end of the process log. And then the next item, I'm going to change that back so I don't forget. The next item actually goes with this, that when new salary plans are loaded, we will not assign a benefit plan to them. That will make them empty or not even no benefits assigned. And then the first time you do a recalc, it's going to spit out user action errors to go in and fix that problem. Either assign them no benefits or assign them an appropriate benefit plan. Okay. To kind of help address those issues with the ESP salary plan settings and there being ambiguity between what's happening in Infinite Visions and what we're seeing with work days and pivoting and scheduling and all that, there's a process that used to just save the default work days, but now it saves a lot more. There's this salary plans, save salary plan defaults and load salary plan defaults. We changed the name of them because they actually save the work days, the work hours, the plan status, equivalency, the calc source method, annualized source, and active status. So you could have one model that's got all your salary schedules looking good. You got the work days all set. And then you go to another plan and somehow they got all messed up. You could go to the one scenario that's good, save them, and then go back to the other scenario and actually load these settings right over the top of that scenario. So it would correct that. It's not too bad to fix up manually if your schedules all use the same work hours and work days and they have all the same settings. But it's quite common for administrative schedules for like principals and assistant principals and other partial year staff to have varying work days in the different grades, like 235s, 240s, 250s. And you could have grades within a schedule that have different work days. I think these are all set to 260 for the administrator. I don't think this database has got that issue. I don't see anything. Yeah, I don't see it. Okay, new salary plans changed when changing salary and benefit assignment. So another helpful thing, if you have confidential, here's the confidential personnel have all been set up to use the classified employee salary or benefit plan. If you decided for some reason they needed to have their own plan, you could go into the assumptions tab, create a new benefit plan, set the parameters and the values and the rates up. And then all you would have to do is come in and change this to the new plan. And all the employees who are on this salary schedule 32 would have their benefit plan changed to map and match the salary schedule. Assuming they all were set to the classified before, if you changed it to a new confidential, all the employees would be updated automatically. So you don't have to go in and change individual employee funding records. When employees are reloaded, if a new step or grade and steps are added, if the schedule is expanded, it will make every effort to copy those parameters, the COLAs, the stepping, the work days, the work hours, the calc method, all those calculation parameters, it's going to copy them from either the grade above it if it's a new step or from the plan above it if it's a new grade. So we try to keep those new steps and grades added and keep the property set right. So that eliminates those blue pluses that show up in the grid. There is also, I don't know, a lot of people don't know that Infinite Visions does support ranged salary schedules. So you don't have to have fixed salary amounts. So you don't, in this case, the data that we're modeling from here, they create one-off salary schedules, a frozen salary schedule. Well, you could create a range salaries plan that you could go in and just key in whatever amount they need, and instead of creating multiple one-off salary schedules. I don't know how it's done. I don't know how it's configured in Visions, but I do know that Visions does support it because we have districts who most of the administrators coming in at range salary schedules, and then we actually use whatever annual rates come in from Visions. And the benefit of doing that is even on a range plan, you can apply a cost of living increase. Okay, salary plan. We solved the problem, and this actually was a one-time data cleanup. The FTE calc method and calc source, and actually even the annualized columns, they got initially set to 0 when they were created a couple years ago, and so they weren't actually being triggering changes when they were changed from the defaults to something else. So, and those columns are the FTE calc source, annualized source, and the calc method. Calc method determines that FTE is based solely on either work hours, work days, work time, or straight FTE. In Oregon, most, if not all districts use work hours, where FTE is based on the number of hours worked within a day. But many other districts in all of Washington uses work time. So it's actually FTE is calculated on the work days times work hours compared to the position. And that's what the calc source is. This determines if we're going to use the position, the work calendar, the salary plan, or just again straight FTE in calculating FTE. Annualize is to when you annualize employees to determine if it's going to use the salary schedule, the same options as the source, or actually it's position, work calendar, or salary plan. You can pick which it's going to annualize to. Most, since we figured out work calendars a few years ago, that they were really the key to all of this, the work calendar is the default. Salary plan. So we fixed the data cleanup on that. Okay, any questions on the salary plans for anybody? All right, moving on to the assumptions. I'm not going to save my changes. Okay, the assumptions tab. It's probably the least used tab by users once they're set up, but it has actually the most impact on the whole modeling scenario. This property grid that's on the assumptions tab, let's get this right here. This property grid, it's common to the assumptions, and it's also used in the budget book. And so some of these settings or fixes would apply to the budget book also. I am thinking in the future that this property grid might show up on the salary plans so that when you click a salary plan here, you would get a properties window that shows up that shows all the attributes of that salary schedule. It used to be pretty simple for the salary plans, but they've just gotten so complex and there's so many properties and settings. I think it would be handy to have a full property grid like the assumptions. So you might see that show up in the next year or so. And I don't want to save that. Okay. So we had some issues with in just the presentation of numbers, if a format for a particular property might have ended in a period or had a period, but the zeros were not present, it would actually show a dot at the end of the numeric value instead of trimming that off and just showing it as a whole number. That was a pretty trivial, just display issue. Values that have a formatting string that include the commas, there was a problem with editing those. If you put the comma in, the form didn't like it. but now I believe you can put in, what can I put something? Well, if we put an amount in here, if I put in 1, comma, oh, it's actually going to beep at you if you try to put the comma in. It doesn't like the comma, but it'll now just skip over it and ignore it. I'm going to take that back out. Assumptions can be restored. If you delete an object or in the assumptions grid, if you click it to delete it, it's going to prompt you first, but now it'll be there with the plus. It hasn't actually been deleted until you save the grid, but if you realize you deleted the wrong thing, you can just delete it again and it'll restore it. You don't have to refresh the whole assumption grid. Assumption inflation factors. We expanded the inflation factor to be able to have a lot of decimals, 0.0034. So you can 1, 2, 3. Yeah, oh, it is only 3. So that's 3%, which is 0.00003. So that's quite a large number of actual decimals. But that is anything that shows in percent or the labels in percent, that value should also be considered percent. It used to be just like a 2-digit number, but we expanded it. There was a really ugly problem from my seat with these drop-down lists. When you would click them, they would sometimes drop down twice. They would sometimes pop back open. It was really a mess on the qualifications. That's really not, benefit plans aren't really a good one. Calculation. The drop-down lists were showing quite a ominous editing, and they weren't nearly as simple as they should have been. And sometimes you actually had to restart ESP, which is the next one, I think. Drop-down list. Oh, also, when you dropped a list box down, see how it actually kept the selection in focus. So it actually kept salary accounts in focus. So if you step away, it would actually clear that value out. So you had to be really, really careful when you edited on the assumptions. So we cleaned that up. Drop-down list, flag editor. That's more applicable to on the budget book stuff. I don't think we have any flag. It's a drop-down checkbox. I don't think we use it on the assumptions. We use it on budget book. I get a pressing enter to complete. If you wanted to edit something, you can just press enter. It wasn't always clearing up the underlying window. The way these grids work is when you go into edit mode, the code that's functioning that actually creates a edit window that's actually laid right on top of that cell that allows you to edit it. And then if you would just click out or push enter to get out of it, it wouldn't actually delete that window, and it would be in the way, and it would just cause all kinds of problems. And again, that was another issue that sometimes you had to restart ESP just to get rid of it. And we fixed all of that. On the object groups, this used to be called account groups, but we realized that account is, in terminology perspective, accounts are considered the entire budget element string, including all the budget elements. And these really are groups of just the account objects. So we relabeled them to be account or object groups. We also applied the icon for that type of account, like all the salary accounts have got the gray employee. All the roll-up accounts that the salaries get rolled up to the budget are in the blue icon. Inflation groups are in the up arrow indicating inflation. It's actually, well, that's another change I didn't actually talk about. If we were to go in and change this to be a reduction, which you can use it, negative inflation as a reduction, right? If I go in and change that to a minus 3.5% and save that, it's actually going to change that icon, I believe, to be a downward green arrow. And so that's another way that you could do some budget modeling if you wanted to create different groups of accounts, and then you could apply either reductions or increases using the inflation percent. Let's see if it did that. Yep. So now it has a it has the downward green arrow.
You would see that on the financials tab,
right,
for those objects, so it stands out pretty easily.
Okay.
Speaking of that, Scott, I know one of the changes we made was for that you could choose the for that inflation group, you can choose which actuals, which
correct, what they're going to source from.
Right, where it's going to source. You can take last year's and then add or subtract from it.
Right. They'll show that. Let's see, I'm having a issue with this. Apologize for that. I'm not sure what it's doing. It didn't like me changing that to the downward arrow. See if we can fix that. Move it back to the way it was. It's not going to let me. I will fix that later. The underspend factor is it's kind of still in kind of design and development. For multi-year projections and year-end projections, you're going to be able to classify groups of objects and actually say, okay, we want to plan on a 5% or a 3% underspend in these objects. And as you do your projections, it will help calculate that in for you. Again, it's a early element. It's not really ready for full prime time use. The smart groups, if you're using particularly the grant package, you can set up specific grants that's based on their fund ID. You can have allowed groups of objects so they can only enter objects that are within the smart group for that particular fund. So if you have like Fund 234, you could put Fund 234 in here and then add only the objects that you want to be allowed to be budget items to be created for that fund. Okay, so you could use that to prevent if there's no staffing allowed in a particular fund, it's just materials and services. You could actually put in a range of 300-699 and put all of your materials and purchase services in there and eliminate the employee costs. Okay. Object groups, added a fixed amounts property. We talked yesterday about the preserving budget amounts, and when you do calculations, if you had dollars in a specific budget item that did not get updated by a calculation, but you wanted to keep that budget amount in there, you could set the allow fixed amounts, and it would preserve the amount and not clear it to zero. We'll see that same change on the benefit plans and the pay components. assumption calculation qualifiers now work with multiple calculations. That's that is actually pretty handy if you're doing some detailed qualifications for your assumptions. If I come into my qualifier, and here I have PERS, this is actually an exclusion where I want to not pay PERS or retirement on my working retirees. So the qualifier says their PERS status cannot equal working retiree. But what we did now is you can actually say, you can put in multiple values, and you can say they can't be working retiree in waiting or retiree work back. You can actually use multiple values in your qualification list. And again, trying to help you cover more bases with just a single calculation. I'm going to refresh that. Employee status column. If you're using employee status, whether the active, inactive, paid leave, unpaid leave, working retiree, the employee status wasn't flagged as a value that could be used as the qualification, but it actually is in there now. I think it's called payroll status in this. Yeah, payroll status. Again, a lot of these lookup values, you can put your own custom label on it. Like PERS, the actual table is normally referred to as just retirement status, but it's actually been changed for Oregon to just be PERS. Okay, properties for implementation. Oh, wait a minute. Properties for information calculation. Oh, we have actually implemented the Oregon State School Fund calculations at a school district this past year, and you'll see some properties here: scenario factor formula, factor result, and then calculation factors. These calculation factors, you can enter and create your own factors, just decimal factors. We've talked to Adam Crean at ODE, the giant spreadsheet that they have that has all of the factors that make up your Oregon State School Fund sheets are available in a spreadsheet. We're intending to actually host those or have them available on our cloud portal, and it's district by district, so you'd be able to actually update those values directly without having to type them all in. And we'll have kind of a package you can set up and actually do the Oregon State School Fund calculations for revenue right in ESP. And we have done that. I'm going to check with that district and see if they would mind if I showed it, and maybe we'll be able to take a look at it tomorrow or the next day. But you'd be able to build formulas using a formula editor and actually build up. If you had factors set up, you could actually build formulas, and then they would be used in this calculation. So you can ADM is one of the factors, your bus, there's a bus, I forgot what all the factors are, but we've implemented and it works really well. We calculated out exactly how his Oregon State School Fund sheet did it. Okay. If anybody wants to play with that, let me know. I will help them. Benefit plans. The allow fixed amounts property, just like the calculations of pay components. So we added a property to the benefit plans. When you have a benefit plan that is set up for use actual amount, and what this does is, if we can go in and find the deduction code that's used for benefits, in this case it's section 125, and most school districts, they actually have the word section 125 in their deduction type, so it's fairly easy to find. But if you've got, for administrators who have their own separately negotiated benefit plans, you can pull those amounts in and be able to apply an inflation factor to them. But the problem is if you create a budgeted position that uses an administrative benefit plan that like this, you don't have any amount available to plug into the annual benefits amount. Actually, that says monthly rate. So this should actually be like 1,400. So this is actually the monthly rate, and then times 12 would be the annual rate. So they will use this amount, and if it ever comes across a budgeted position that has a FTE without a benefit amount, it will use this default amount so that you don't have benefit plans or benefits calculating to zero in those cases. Okay, if you should delete a benefit plan, any employees who are on that benefit plan will get set to the default, which is no benefits, just so that you're able to delete that plan. But you'll have to be aware of that they're going to be set to the default of, in this case, it's no benefits. You can make any one of them the default, but by default, the no benefits is the default. Okay, inflation factors increased the number of decimals. You can put inflation factors on the benefit plans. Again, just it's been around a while, but you can either put an inflation percent in, or you can put a fixed amount in. So you can say, I want to give them an extra $100 a month, or I want to increase it by 3%. You can do one or the other, or you could actually do both. Increase it by 3% and give them $100 or $50 or however much you want to do for that year. When you were using the actual benefit plan, on any benefit plan, let's go look at the classified. For the qualifications, you can have FTE or total FTE, total work days, total work week hours, or total work time. You can use any one or all of these parameters to determine which rate is pulled out. But it used to be, since the original was the salary, you used to have to put a real small value in here, like 0.01, in order to get it to calculate, to just kind of fool it. But if salary doesn't actually have any bearing on it, you can leave that blank now and just work on, they have to have 180 work days, 32 hours a week, and a total of 1,260 hours in the work year in order to get their $1349.20 a month in benefits. Added to, we will eventually, we've set it up, we have a data schedule configured now on the benefit plans. We can set this up to actually use a data schedule to calculate what this rate should be. And we could use something like insurance status, which is a new lookup table that was created to support this. The problem is I haven't found any place in Infinite Visions that actually has an insurance status. It's just their election. But it gets complicated because there's a combination of elections. There's one for medical, there's one for dental, and there's one for vision. And there could also be an optional one for life insurance. So we don't really have a good way of figuring out what their insurance status is. The one district that's doing this, they came up with a blended rate. You know, they used the primary medical premium amount, which was the most costly, and then they just added a blended amount for the dental and vision. So they were able to come up with a simple lookup table for the data schedule to work with the benefit plan. If you're if you're budgeting based on monthly cap amounts and you are pooling all of your benefits, it really doesn't gain. It's just a lot of work to try and budget to the actual individual and their elections. But in a smaller district, such as an ESD, it is possible, and it can be very well effective. But remember, the tighter you get on your benefits of budgeting, the less pool of extra money you may have to go and solve problems and be the hero. Okay, pay components. Pay components, we added an include other pay column. And this, we generally configure another pay component that you can throw anything in. To count mask is all asterisk. So wherever you create a position or funding for other pay in this pay component, it's going to go wherever you create that funding. So the account code follows one for one. But if you should flag this as include other pay, when we reload the employees, there's an other pay column now in the actuals in the current Infinite Visions data. And any additional or supplemental pay that is found that is not included in a configured pay component will be summed up and just loaded into a single other pay amount. This will allow you to track all of the pay that goes out for a particular employee. It's not going to put it in the model, but it's going to at least give you a representation of all of the pay items that are in the payroll system. You could then do a other pay comparison with your total calculated pay components and find differences, and just make sure you got your bases covered for all of your supplemental pay. Okay, added pay component. As pay components get more and more complex, we've added a prohibit. So if we looked at a pay component in the employee grid, and there can be up to 20 pay components. And if I look at model pay component, here's all my pay components. Let's say it's a cell phone allowance, or actually long-term disability would be a better one to use. But anyway, they all work the same. So you've got a qualification that says everybody in this employee status, or everybody on this salary schedule, grade and step, or you might even use a data schedule based on which plan they're on to determine what their cell phone allowance is. But you might have a handful of employees that no matter what, you don't want to give them a cell phone allowance. So now that we've got the cell phone pay component there, we can see the rest of the columns, and one of them is prohibit. And so you can come in and prohibit a specific employee from getting a configured pay component based on the normal qualifications. And this is just a way of handling the one-offs, or maybe somebody like the superintendent who gets his own cell phone allowance or car allowance or something that's over and above everybody else in the normal mode of things. You could prohibit them. In the past, you'd have to remember to go in and disable that pay component for that employee. But every time you reset the employee qualifications or reloaded and copied your employees from Visions, those get reset. And so it would throw that qualification or turn that enable back on. The prohibit will not be overridden by any actions like reloading. And you can see how I put a to-do list. I'm going to have it show up as a gray pin to be kind of indicating a soft override. It's normal, but just to let you know there is something different about that employee. When you add a pay component on the assumption tab, it used to just start over with a completely empty pay component, but now it will create a copy of the one that you're on and give you a starting place. My virtual machine sometimes switches out of multi-monitor mode. Not sure why. So let's bring that back. So anyway, so you don't have to start over when you build your pay components. You can clone them, or if you're at the top of the assumption tree for the pay components, if you're right here and you click the plus or add one, it's going to use the first one in the list. New pay component prohibit, clone. We renamed what was the preserved amount. It's now the allow fixed amounts, with just like the benefit plans and calculations. Inflation factor decimals were increased, just like the other assumptions. When you configure a pay component that's going to actually use work days or a fixed amount as its factor, it's going to automatically set the percentage of that pay component to 1. So it's going to allow it to use the actual factor amount. I think we have that set up for extra duty, where it actually uses the factor as the multiplier, and the actual value is the days, and it's times the salary schedule. Their workday amount in the salary schedule. Where's it set up? It's actually not. It should be right here. This should be the model daily rate. Yeah. Whenever you copy, reload, and copy from Infinite Visions over to the model, and that happens when you create a new year, create a working scenario, or you manually trigger that copy on the employee grid, it's going to trigger a reset of all the qualifications. So it's going to be like a new employee load. It's going to go figure everything out. The only thing it's not going to reset is that prohibit. And it basically will still do all the qualifications behind the scene, but then it won't let an amount be assigned to that pay component. Okay, data new schedule. On the data schedules, you can create just hand entered their data schedules that aren't tied to a lookup table. In this case, this district uses they pay the longevity based on the years of service. So we have threshold values as the schedule type. Employee column is district of service. And so the idea is here, once they hit 15 years of service, they get 30 cents more an hour. Once they hit 20 years of service, they get 55 cents an hour. 25 years, 80, and then anything over 30, they get $1.05 an hour more. And that's actually used, this data schedule is used up in the longevity pay component. And the qualification is they have to be a classified employee, and then that amount from the schedule is modified by the work time. So however many hours they have on the funding, it's going to give them that many hours times this data schedule. But there was a lot of funkiness in how you edit these one-off or non-lookup table data schedules, and we fixed a lot of that editing. We fixed issues with finding duplicates and reporting duplicates, and you might, if somehow during workers' comp, if you change the name of a workers' comp code, that might confuse ESP, because we need to track the workers' comp code and those lookup values for both PERS, workers' comp, unemployment. There's all kinds of codes that we consume or use from Visions. if you're editing or payroll's changing of data there, it could result in us creating duplicates. We're going to detect those, and it's going to spit out as a user action in the scenario audit and calculations. So you might see messages that say, hey, please go check your data schedule for workers' comp, or check your data schedule for retirement. And data schedules also have inflation factors, so you can see we increased the decimals from 3 to 6. In this case, this is an example. You can see we added a nickel an hour to this data schedule. So you can see the prior year Infinite Visions was 25 cents, 50 cents, 75. It's now 30, 55, 80, and $1.05. So that's kind of how you can use the inflation factor, both as percentages and fixed amounts. Okay, assumptions. Moving on. Where's our time? 2:09. We've been at it an hour. We'll keep going. On the employee details, we will bring one up. Again, it's a heavy duty form. It does a lot. It's a handy form if you're going to deal with employees one at a time. If you're going to deal with fundings one at a time, you might be better off to just stay in the grid. But let's look at Shannon Blair and employee details. And there was a problem if there was no benefit plan assigned to an employee. It would trigger an error when this form was loaded, but we fixed that. That's the first item on the list. This form has grown in its usage and its capabilities. We keep adding stuff to it, and we have to reorganize it to make it somewhat usable, somewhat intuitive. But we actually have those user fields. We put them on their own tab, and so they appear. Oh, it didn't finish loading. Why didn't it load? I don't know that I did anything to interrupt it. There it is. Weird. So the user forms are now, user values are now on their own tab. So here's that iColors check that we were looking at in the main grid. And this is also putting them on their own tab. If we need to expand it to have more custom or user defined fields, we can do that. I don't know, I'm trying to remember the time frame. It could have been this last year we added education. So you can actually have degrees, get the degree if they've been configured in Visions. We will load the degree status and the education and degree year. If you have the fields populated in Visions for degree credits and in-service credits and all that, they will show up on the employee data. We also added performance ratings. There are 4 ratings fields that you can define however you want to use them. These could be used in a supplemental pay to give a cost of living increase based on performance ratings, or to give bonuses. And you will be able to load the performance ratings, import them with Excel based on employee IDs. If they're not available somewhere in ERP or in Infinite Visions. So again, we don't have this. I don't know that anybody's actually using this, but it was something that Carrie Hughes with Infinite Visions and I talked about. They were having a district that was interested in knowing if we could support that, and it was actually really simple to add. So it is there, it is usable. If somebody is interested in some help in setting that up and using it, just let me know. Okay, use on tab. Grants. The grants tab most people don't know that it exists because a lot of systems it's just turned off. But more and more people, we had about 5 or 6 of the people in the morning, once they saw that it was there, they said, yeah, I want to do that. So I think we're going to we actually have it set up on the agenda for Thursday, where I'm going to talk more about it and how it's set up. But briefly, it allows you to set up the grant budgeting for a single year. It doesn't do the entire end-to-end grant, which could be a 2, 3, or 4 year grant. It doesn't know how to handle the fiscal year ends typically being an imbalance with the grant year periods. But it's on the agenda, it's on the radar to create a kind of a grant workbench. And you would basically, for a multi-year grant, you'd have the grant title, and then you'd have, fiscal year 1, 2, 3s underneath it, where you could have the fully allocated grant amount, and then you could split it out year by year and kind of track and have one year flow to the next. That's kind of the vision, but I've had that vision for 15 years. It's just that nobody's really pressed us on it, but we at least are able to track the budget of a grant for the year by year. We have the revenue expenses. We can keep the grant in balance automatically by configuring a float amount, typically in like supplies, school supplies, where it will pull and push in and out of that account code to keep the grant balanced. It can also calculate the indirect factor back to the general fund if you want it to do so. It can be a global indirect factor, or you can specify a factor individually by grant. You can use a global account mask on where you want to put your indirect. I think it's like 5,600 or something like that. In Oregon, or you can actually override and use a separate mask for each grant so that it puts the indirects in specific spots. So we'll talk some more about that later this week, but we fixed a problem with the editing and the adding and deleting of grants in the grid. The next responsibility centers, that was just a cut and paste. Ignore the responsibility centers on the notes. We're going to be talking more about responsibility centers on Thursday. Oh, actually, it says tomorrow. No, it said Wednesday, but we're a day off, so it's going to be Thursday or Friday. We're gonna have to compress a lot of things to get through all of this. Scenario crosstab. Is anybody here? Let's see. I know Tammy does it. Bill, I'm not sure if you've used crosstab, and Matthew wouldn't have done it yet. But let me just show it to you. What it does, it actually allows you to look at multiple scenarios side by side. And it's really handy when you're looking at forecast year scenarios. It's really handy when you're looking at your reference scenarios, or if you're looking at different scenarios for staffing, like 1% COLA here, 1-step data, 3 furlough days here, all the different combinations. It's not uncommon for some districts to create 20 and 30 scenarios within a fiscal year, as they're modeling what's the best way to spend the money that we've been entrusted to on our salaries. So this is the crosstab. You've got the same list of scenarios that appears on the Scenario Explorer. And I'm going to just do a crosstab of my fiscal base and my 3 reference scenarios. I'm going to add those to the grid. I'm going to go over to the financials. The crosstab grid has the same scoping ability that the employees in the financial grid does. And I'm going to trim this down before I go to the employees, because when you're taking 4 scenarios and lining them all up by account codes, it does take some time for the database to do all that alignment. And then we have to build a hierarchy on top of that. But it's going to show us when it gets ready, good and ready. Most of the columns from the financial tab and the employee tab are available in the cross tab, but it just creates literally hundreds and hundreds of columns that could be included, because if you have to take whatever columns are normally available and multiply it by the number of scenarios you have in the cross tab, and you can have up to 20 scenarios. So you're actually doing quite a bit of data manipulation to get all these things lined up properly. When I do the next phase of the budget element restructuring, where I go to a common account code table, I think I talked about that yesterday, it should speed this process up quite a bit also. It should speed it up a lot. I didn't think the financial took this long. Oh, look at that. I lost the summing.
Yeah.
That's what
normally it
that's
doesn't
what
take that long. Yeah.
Yeah. The scope, I'm not summed by any element. So it's loading the full full scope for all 4 scenarios. Ugh. It's almost done. You can sometimes cancel a grid, change your scope, and then redo it. But now it's the, is it almost done? Should I wait? Should I cancel it? I don't know.
Can you switch back to the scenarios tab?
No. It's kind of in its own world while it's building the grid. Apologize for that. When I switched over, it had the object at the top, and it was summed. Tammy, have you played with the save grid views on here yet?
No, well.
You don't remember? You slept since then?
I have. And we got done bargaining. I was like, oh, thank goodness that's over.
Well,
I look at it again, and then I ran away.
We found out there is something wrong with it this morning. I'm going to have to check on it. But they are there and they do work. But there is something wrong with saving the grid views. Because there's so many columns available, it's just taking a long time. It's calculated. Because there's so many columns available, it's really handy to be able to save grid views and just switch a whole grid view at once without having to rebuild every grid view from scratch. It'll always remember the last settings, but that's just not enough to make this really a useful tool.
Well, and I think one of the things that I would find is if I change scenarios and then I would go back in, the grid view seemed to change. Like it doesn't add the new scenarios in, and so I have to move those around. And I usually worked within the employee tab.
Right.
So the total cost while we were just comparing scenarios for classified staff.
Right.
And so I would change the scenarios, and then I would go into the tab, and I had to set it up every time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Oh, hey, we got some life come to us. Again, this is not, you normally don't want to load a full financial scoped grid in even the main grid, let alone in a crosstab where it's dealing with 4 times the data. It only loaded 7,000 rows though. That's not a lot. But every column is a sum column because they're all numbers. There we go. So you can see it created, actually loaded 7,000 rows, but by the time you add all the hierarchy rows to it, it's a large. I'm going to change this. And put it back to a, I'm going to go like this. See, that's better. So here you can see we've got our full object collection in the tree grid. We have our different scenarios, and we have a baseline comparison done between each of the scenarios. So from this perspective, if you're in the salary negotiations and you had this printed out and they're talking about, okay, what let's say you're dealing with the license with the OEA, and you want to know what happens, what a 1% COLA would cost us. So if our fiscal base was right and we added 1% COLA to all of our licensed salaries, that's going to cost $432,000 in just salary. Now, the other costs are in there, but they're blended with the classified administrative salaries. You would have to go in and create a scenario, a separate scenario for the licensed salaries to show from the financial side what the actual cost would be. But you would at least be able to figure out, you know, a 1.2% COLA would be 1.2 times this amount just in salary dollars.
Question.
And here's the one step, and then here's 1 day. So 1 day in the district costs about $473,000.
So what I would do is use the
Employee grid.
grid, and I would filter by the class for like the license.
Right. That's what I'm going to show next.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, this is just salary costs, the deltas, because that's all that we changed. But if we really wanted to use our reference scenarios to show total cost, if you come up here and do what Tammy was talking about, I'm going to change my scope before I go to the employee tab. And if I just wanted to look at classified or certified salaries, I'm going to change that. It's going to simplify this grid a lot. But then when I switch to the employees, it's going to show me all of my certified employees, and the default column is total cost. And this does take a little bit to build also. So while that's building, what were the changes we made on this that we had to talk about? Cross tab, object row. Oh, we added the object row icons. The all scenarios, we added some grouping to the column menus. The financial cross tab now supports all scope, all elements summed like the main grid does. That's something that was added last year. You used to have to have at least the fund visible or fund included in the financial grid, but now you can have all of the elements summed and just get a table. And cross-tab views have been implemented, but I'm not sure if it's this demo database, but I was having trouble saving them this morning, so I'm going to have to look at that. So here we've got our licensed salaries, got all of our employees, and here's our model fixed cost total, 1-step fixed cost, 1% fixed cost, 1% cost total. So we can see that 1% COLA for our licensed teachers, and this is including salary, supplemental pay, benefits, fixed costs, PERS, all of our costs. This is a total cost that ESP is calculating. It's $579,000, almost $580,000 per 1% COLA. So if you wanted to know what you know, now 2% COLA would not quite be twice that. It wouldn't be any more than twice, because there's factors like that are included in here, like your benefits, like your fixed rate benefits. They're not going to be 1.2%. It's only really the salary items that are going to go up. But when you're doing the modeling, these are just kind of like rough numbers, like about where are we going to be if we give a 2% COLA? Well, you're going to be about $1,160,000. You're not going to be any more than that based on these calculations. Or if you're looking at one day, you know, $319,000 in teaching costs per day, just for your license salaries. If you wanted to look at certified, you could add those to the scope and see all of that data also. Okay. Crosstab's pretty cool once you figure out what it's doing. And again, if you build a forecast, Tammy, you used forecast scenarios, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And were you able to lay them side by side like this?
Yes, but it took like some thinking and planning about what we actually wanted to model in the forecast. Because you're like, if we do this in year one and this in year one, you're building like tree branches. And so my suggestion is to write out what limbs you're going to chase down as possibilities, because it gets pretty cumbersome.
We should talk about if you have any ideas on how we could represent that and simplify it.
Right. The other thing is once you create like a forecast scenario, it never looks back at changes you made to the original. So like if you do like a 2% COLA in year one, and then you do a 1% COLA in year two, let's say, but then you're like, oh no, I really want a mid-year 2% COLA. You can't change that original scenario and then it redoes the forecast years.
Yes, you can. Yeah, if you just go back into that middle scenario, change to a split COLA of fall and spring, and then start at the first scenario and then recalculate and say there's an option to recalculate forecast scenarios. Okay. And then go to lunch.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. The other thing is that's great, but I just thought about it. If you do that, then you don't get to use those in your crosstab scenarios because you're overwriting. So you may want to, you can't copy a scenario tree, right? So
I see.
Maybe that's what I was running down. I was like, oh, if I could just copy this entire thing as it is and then go and change year one to this and then let it kind of do its thing out.
Oh, I see what you're saying, that it would be handy if,
yeah, I mean, we had a really complicated year where we're reclassing, we're doing a mid-year COLA, and then the next year there was like a possibility of all of these different things, re-spanning the salary schedule with a different percent spread between.
Right. So what you're saying is, like, if you set this forecast sequence up, if you could right click here and then create scenario, you would want to actually,
if I could create the whole thing,
create this and all of these as
wish list
as 8 and then 8 forecast. And yeah, it's just data. It's just, I mean, it's,
I know.
I could definitely see that as a time saver. Okay, that's good feedback, Tammy. Thank you.
Well,
so, and also on Crosstab, you can use the save to spreadsheet and get this puppy printed out pretty easily, or you can save it to an actual Excel spreadsheet. Actually, that's what this is doing. I was talking about printing it. You can print it also. But here's the Crosstab setup for saving after it's saved to spreadsheet. So this could be handy to just have this printed out for you if you're heading to a negotiations meeting. Okay, and one of the benefits of being in negotiations and having this, at least you know kind of where you are, is you've got some credible data. You're not going to get challenged. Well, where did you get your data? Well, let's see. This was loaded this morning at 8 o'clock, and this represents our actual staffing. And it's because a lot of times when they actually see the numbers, when you're in negotiations, they don't really have a vision of what is totally involved in an employee's salary. All they really are focused on is what is in their paycheck, and they don't realize that all the benefits at least in public schools is almost 50% of their salary. So that being said, let's move on. What time is it? 2:30. We got a half hour. Scenario crosstab, Scenario Explorer. Scenario Explorer. Most of the districts, they don't have a real need for it, but there's the ability to hide scenarios. So if you're an app admin and you're creating a model, let's say we didn't want anybody to see that, we could actually, where is it, status? You could actually set the owner to an individual. So I could set it just to me as an app admin. And I think I can set it as private. So if I was working on some really deep secret stuff for the superintendent, and I didn't even want the rest of the budget office to have access to it, I could set it up that I'm the owner and it's private, and that scenario is not going to show up in anybody else's Scenario Explorer, even the budget analysts within the department. So we changed that from owners to owner, and there's just a labeling change. Scenario Explorer made actuals adjustment column. In the Scenario Explorer, you have the summary. We took the actuals adjustment column out. It was kind of noise. It's not used that often, but between actuals, amount, let me reset my layout. I just want to see what the default is. So we have the general fund amount, the actuals total, and the encumbrance. Those should be reversed. 21, yeah. But there is an actuals adjustment column that was in default, that was default visible. And the actual adjustments is available on the budget grid. It's for those times when you know that something is coming up. It's not yet in the ERP system. You might have some settlement or some big expense that you want to get into the actuals, but nobody may know about it but you. You can actually create an actuals adjustment in the financials grid and get that at least into the budget. You know, at the last minute when you're doing your budget documents, you could make changes or tweaks to your actuals using the budget adjustments. And it's right here, actuals adjustment. And you can see it's a lighter purple than the rest of the columns. And you have to be a budget admin in order to make those changes. But I could come in and throw in, it's not letting me edit that. That should be an editable column. It may not recognize me as ESP Support as having access. So, but you as a budget admin could throw numbers into this budget and tweak your actuals, both positive and negative. Okay. Scenario versions. I put this in here. I created it. Scenario versions will automatically open the new scenario. And then Tim and I talked about it. And what we actually came up with is if you create a scenario, either a new year working or just a copy, and it's warning me that it's going to recalculate before it makes the copy. It was going to automatically open that scenario. But what I've done is I put an option on there, open scenario after creating. So it'll create it and then automatically open it up in the main grid. So is this where we've got the options? At owner, add, keep, but yes. So when you create a new year or a working scenario, the process of creating a new year, unless you've maintained your staffing or your budget in ESP throughout the year, you may want, the default is to just start over with whatever's in the ERP system or Infinite Visions. So if you have kept your budget up in a working scenario and you're creating your new year scenario from your working scenario, you would want to check this box to keep model data from 2020-21-6. That way it's not going to override the model with what it loads. All it will do is reload. It'll create the scenario version, get everything set for the new year, and then all it will do is reload the Infinite Visions or the blue data sets. It will not overwrite the model. That's going to allow you to do a pretty effective fall balancing where you can check what's actually loaded into Visions with how you budgeted for your adopted budget. The reality is most school districts, once they produce their budget, publish it, and then implement it and load it in the end of June for the July 1st, they forget about ESP until this time of year where they have to start worrying about it next year. So even though ESP is great for doing that and keeping your costs current and figuring out what your projected costs will be, or playing what ifs, what happens if we add a position mid-year to a certain department, you can actually do all that in ESP, but you have to be in ESP all the time to keep things going. So the default is to not keep the model data. It's to override it with the values from Infinite Visions. But we added this option to keep the model budgeted in vacant positions. So if you created budgeted positions as placeholders in your model and you want to keep those, you would check that. It's still going to copy all of the employees over, but it's not going to remove the budgeted positions that you created. That's going to give you a way to at least reconcile the people that were hired to fill those budgeted positions. And then you can also check annualized employees when it's done calculating. This used to default to on, but we decided it's actually best to create your new year, load your employees, see how they all look, see how they compare, and then annualize all your employees for your fiscal base to see how they change the budget for next year. So anyway, I'm going to cancel that. We're going to look at create new year tomorrow, I believe, if I get the problem fixed with Northwest Regional. Okay. 42, we have 15 minutes. I'm going to skip over budget element maintenance because I want to do that later, but I'm just going to go to the process log. And if we go, actually the process log, yeah, let's go to the process log and I'm going to recalculate the whole scenario. And actually there are some additional changes in here that didn't make it into the log. You've always had the ability to remove empty records and force to recalculate employees. But we now have this feature where you can have ESP calculate your ending fund balances for your general fund or for specific special revenue funds. So, and you can have it include the model or just your prior year. Sometimes it's handy if you forgot to clear out all your encumbrances from your prior years. You may want to let it recalculate your prior year balances on your actuals. And then that's where you would click the set daily snapshot. And then you can pick the account code where you want the ending fund balance. Gosh, it's 9,700. Fund balance. Yeah, it's like 9,700. It's not 5,400, but it could. I mean, in this case, you're calculating it for next year, so you probably really want it to be 9,700. What isn't it like about that? There. And we're not going to do this, but what it will do is it will actually calculate the net difference between revenue and expenditures and create, if it doesn't exist, an object 9771. And in a lot of cases, you really want it to, you want to put in 000. You want to, map it to some place specific. And really, you only want it to set the fund so that everything else is set properly. And you may want to check the budget office or something else for the center. So you can be pretty specific about where you put it. But for each and every fund, it will go in and do the math between your net expenses, net revenue, and put the difference in this account code here. So we're not going to do that, but I'm going to recalc because I want to see the log. Okay, so here's the process log. Again, this is just kind of it. We like to show it because I like to watch how it's working. If I see it hanging up at any particular phase or step, I like to just see what's going on with it and when any errors occur. But it just kind of gives you an indication of all the things that it's doing and all the audits that it's taking as it's calculating the scenario. So it's calculating the employees, and then it's doing the roll up, and then it's doing the assumptions, and takes quite a bit to cook the scenario. There's an error right there, invalid. See, here's the new action items that are coming in. It's checking to make checking the FTE count. The FTE count between the employee grid and the financial grid, it's matches, so it's balanced. It's now going to check in the employee audit. It's checking to make sure the same amounts from the employee grid got rolled up and matched the amounts in the financial grid. And we're going to see a series. As long as you see green balance there, you're okay. It's this is actually takes the longest of the recalc, this phase here. So there's some more action items, and then you can see everything balanced, so we're good to go. Not sure. I must have changed something in the assumptions that's generating that error. It's employee status. I messed something up in the assumptions when I was playing with them. So here's those. So first of all, we've got action items. It's only gonna do this when there's action items present. Pop this up, and it's basically saying, hey, there's stuff you need to check. But it's also going to summarize any errors. It's it's got a warning here. We're doing a spread calculation. We're spreading $1.29 million across all of our salaries for a PERS bond. And there's something, I forget what causes this. I'll have to go in and look at the setup. But it will actually balance itself to an even 1.2 million. Actually, we're spreading 1.2 million, but it actually spread only 1.29 million. So there's $90,000. It accounted for it. It found the budget item with the highest amount and added the delta to it. So it still spread the full 1.2 amount, but it felt that there was too much of an adjustment at the end of that calc. So that's just a warning to go look and see how that's been configured. But these are the user action items. You've got total salary FTE greater than 1. And see, you've got this Jesse McIntosh and Floyd Simpson. They've got a total FTE of 2.0. So there's something wrong, and typically it has to do with their funding records or the position records in Infinite Visions. They were doubled up, or he moved from one position to the next and they forgot to close it out, or there's actually several reasons why this happens. But it's a problem. We do allow the cases. It is not always an action item if an employee is over 1.0 FTE. They might be a 1.275 or something like that if they teach an extra period, and that's legitimate. Well, you can go into the salary schedule for the certified teachers and change what the total salary FTE threshold is. And not have to worry about those extra periods that get added to their FTE. But these blatant ones, 2.0, you have to do something about. Also, we've got some vacant positions here that have FTE, zero salary with valid FTE. And you can see, I can tell the reason by looking at this, is they're vacant positions. They haven't been set a plan code. So we don't know how much they're going to make yet. So you would just have to go into these vacant positions and set a salary plan, and then that would make those go away. So these are just items that you need to be taking care of. Non-employee roll-up. We've got some employees that are being charged to a non-salary roll-up account, the 0121, which is substitutes. And that might be acceptable if you've got a permanent roving sub that's hired by the district. But you probably would want to move him to a different object code, or create a 0123 or another object that can be included in the salary roll-up accounts to account for a full-time employee. Because normally the 0121 is for temporary or casual employees, and they don't have the same benefits and the same factors. Or there's a big trend to outsource your substitutes and pay a fee, and there's no FTE at all involved with that. It actually becomes a paid service. So anyway, but this is just telling you of a situation that's not normal, and put it on there as an action item to fix. And so, and we are going to, I already wrote the change down. Remember when we looked at the salary plans and I changed the administrators to no benefits, recalculated, and we came up with a bunch of notes. We're going to summarize the notes just like this at the end of the process log, so that once they scroll by, you won't lose them. And at any point in time, if you want to step back and see where this occurred, like this warning, if I double click on that row, it's going to take me right back up into the log and show me that it was during the PERS pickup, and show me the log. It doesn't mean a lot to you guys, but it does mean a lot to us. So this is the first thing we start with when we're trying to track down a warning or an error even. So the errors I can see, double click there. So yeah, it's the employee status, it's the qualifier. I'll have to change that, check that configuration. So the process log, the log now shows the actions in the purple color. It also was a problem when it was done, the log wasn't scrolling all the way to the bottom of the screen. So we fixed that. And error and warning actions, they're now banded in their color. Change employee recalc. There were some changes, like employees stepped into a lesser salary. If you've got some salary plan issues or you enabled stepping, it was quite often, we would often find that for certain employees, particularly administrators, that they would step, all of the steps in the salary schedule wouldn't have salary amounts. And so if you didn't have a step limit fixed and you decided to step, in the case we found this, it was actually the superintendent of the district. They stepped into a $0 salary because payroll hadn't put any amounts in. They should have never stepped that salary plan anyway, but we at least, all of a sudden they lost $250,000 out of their budget. But now that's, hold on, let me get rid of this. Where is it? I don't know where it is. Oh, there it is. It went away. Okay. We changed that from a warning to an action because that's something that you need to take care of. The default benefit was changed from a warning to an action. Audit roll-up, the non-employee roll-up is an action, which we saw that, and it wasn't showing the error, action, or log on every item. It's now showing it on every item. It used to just show it at the top heading. Added action items for log entries, employee status. Oh, default. If you haven't identified a default employee status, which is usually active, or a default workers' comp code, which in most districts they choose the classified or the blue collar worker, whatever that is, or the office worker, they choose that as the default. And what was the other one? Workers' comp and retirement. I think retirement status. Normally people pick the OPSERP because new employees are now by default go to OPSERP. If you haven't set a default, you might get an action item asking you to go in and set that default. If we talked about the audits for duplicate data schedules, if there are problems found in the data schedules, you might see a check the data schedules on the assumptions tab action item. Eliminated invalid log entries indicating a ranged plan, employee salary plan was inactive. Yeah, it was a superfluous action item because a ranged plan doesn't, it didn't really matter that it was inactive or not. So, but it was showing up as an action item. Another one we cleared up is if you recalculated just a scope and not the whole scenario. So if you just wanted to like calculate a particular fund or a particular department, you could change the scope, and whatever scope is here, like if I wanted to just recalculate Center 31, I could do it by recalculating the scope here instead of recalculating the whole scenario. Recalculate the whole scenario there. If you happen to select a scope that didn't have any employees in it, no FTE, it would spit out a warning that said no FTE found. Well, yeah, duh, there's no FTE in that. So we cleaned that one up too. Okay. Scenario calculations, 3 minutes. This green flag, you know, it was red and now it's green. It means that our scenario has been fully cooked. All of the changes we've made have been incorporated into the scenario. Now, what we did is there's so many different factors that you could change that will trigger that to go red or indicate that the scenario is not fully calculated. And we've updated the list of properties that will set that because there are some settings that get applied, like having to do with user status and user maintenance, that really aren't scenario based, that we don't want to trigger that that recalc required. So we have to be careful. We can't just say, hey, whenever adjustments are applied, trigger that flag. We have to track it a little bit more closely. But we've updated that, and we've eliminated most of the times when somebody has said, my scenario's recalculated, it's green, but this value from the employee tab is not what's on the financial tab. We've closed most of those out. Added active, pending, and annualized list of values that will trigger. Oh, it's a similar thing. If you change an employee from active, pending, or annualized, that will set the employees to require, they need a recalc. Oh, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Eliminate the error in process log when a scope is calculated, has no employees. It actually was showing up as an error, and we would actually get an email. And so we'd have to chase it down and figure. It took us a while to figure out what was going on, because most people calculate their whole scenario, but we have people now, and now that responsibility centers are being used more and more, where you're just going to calculate a sub-scope of the budget. Okay, with that, I mentioned, did I mention earlier we're going to push budget book out? We're probably going to have a separate session on that because there's just so much to it, but we will have a separate budget book session. Other changes, not really. I think we're going to kind of move on. I think they're pretty benign. There is kind of a cool thing I might show you just as we get started this morning, tomorrow, with the scenario audit, where you can add notes and messages. So if I can get that a quick demo set up of that, I'll show that to you. But I think tomorrow we will, Tim is going to take over for the day and talk about salary plans and data sets calculations, and we'll see how far we get. I am going to spend the rest of my day and evening probably trying to get the Northwest Regional Infinite Visions link set back up so those districts can get their new years created. So if there's no questions, I'm going to let you guys go. 3 o'clock, you have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow afternoon. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Tim, or Scott.
Yes.
I had sent